Welcome to This Explainer. Have you ever seriously wondered why you do the things you do, even when you know better? Today, we're totally unpacking the brain science behind our daily routines, and we're looking at some incredible science-backed tools to help you engineer better ones. Whether you're trying to build this amazing new morning routine or you just want to finally dismantle that totally destructive late-night scrolling habit, understanding the literal anatomy of your brain's habit loops is the absolute master key.
So let's look at our roadmap for today. We'll start with the neuroscience of habits, then we'll uncover the 66-day reality of habit formation, look into designing tiny habits, check out the power of habit stacking, and finally, wrap up with the habit replacement strategy.
Now, before we actually dive into the biology of it all, I want you to think about a really frustrating routine of your own. Ask yourself, why does breaking it feel like this impossible test of willpower instead of just a simple design problem? We so often beat ourselves up over a perceived lack of discipline, but as we're going to see, the issue really isn't your willpower. It's actually that you're fighting literally millions of years of neurological evolution.
And get this, here's something completely wild. Researchers at Oxford University discovered that a newborn baby actually has 41% more neurons than an average adult. Why? Well, because a baby's brain is basically a blank canvas. As we age, our brains naturally undergo this process called synaptic pruning. We just prune away all those unused connections and aggressively strengthen the ones we repeat. So by the time you're an adult, you actually have fewer overall neurons, but you have these incredibly strong, highly efficient neural pathways. You are, literally, a highly efficient habit machine.
All right, moving into section 1, the neuroscience of habits.
It's fascinating how a new behavior initially lives right in the prefrontal cortex. That's the area where your conscious, really effortful decision-making happens. Like when you first learn to drive a car or try to stick to a new diet, you actually feel the cognitive strain right there. But your brain is always looking to save energy. So, over time, as you keep repeating the action, control shifts deep down into the basal ganglia, and specifically into the striatum. That region's job is to automate repetitive behaviors. Once a habit sets up shop there, you're pretty much acting entirely on autopilot. Which brings us to neuroplasticity and long-term potentiation, or LTP for short. Basically, when you repeat an action, synapses that fire together wire together. And this biological process is massively reinforced by the release of dopamine whenever you experience any kind of reward. Dopamine acts as this little chemical marker, basically telling your brain, hey, this felt really good, let's strengthen this pathway so we can do it again without even thinking. This perfectly explains why habits are just incredibly difficult to erase and why we absolutely shouldn't feel shame over a lack of willpower. Your brain is literally just doing its job.
Moving on to section 2, the 66-day reality.
I'm sure you've heard that famous rule, right? The one saying it takes 21 days to form a new habit. It sounds so perfectly manageable. Well, actually, scratch that. It turns out that was just a random observation made by a plastic surgeon way back in 1960. His name was Dr. Maxwell Maltz, and he just noticed it took his patients about 21 days to get used to seeing their new noses in the mirror. That's it. It was a purely situational observation, absolutely never a rigorous scientific study on behavior change.
The true, actual science-backed reality is quite a bit different. Current research shows that it takes an average of 66 days for a new behavior to become completely automatic. And, depending on the complexity of the habit and the person, studies show it can actually take anywhere from 18 to 254 days. The main takeaway here isn't to get discouraged, not at all, but rather to set some realistic expectations. Consistency matters so much more than trying to do a 21-day sprint.
Let's jump to section 3, designing tiny habits. So knowing that this rewiring process takes some real time, Stanford behavioral scientist Dr. B.J. Fogg developed this absolutely brilliant universal framework called the Fogg behavior model to make these changes virtually frictionless. It essentially states that behavior equals motivation, ability, and a prompt. B equals MMAP. It means any behavior is only going to happen when all three of those things converge at the exact same moment. If a habit just isn't sticking for you, one of these elements is definitely missing. And honestly, usually the real culprit is that we make the ability part way too hard.
I absolutely love this comparison from Fogg, where he says behaviors are like bicycles. Using that metaphor, he explains that if you make a habit tiny enough, say, committing to doing just one single push-up instead of a brutal 45-minute workout, or, flossing just one tooth, you drastically lower that ability hurdle. You completely remove the need for massive motivation and willpower. Taking that first, incredibly tiny step generates this sense of forward momentum that your brain absolutely loves, setting up to scale the whole thing naturally over time.
Section 4, the power of habit stacking.
Now, this is the incredible habit stacking formula popularized by James Clear, and it is a total game changer. It brilliantly solves the prompt part of our B equals MAP equation by calling right back to that synaptic pruning we talked about earlier. Instead of relying on a phone alarm or these random fleeting bursts of motivation, you anchor a brand new, tiny behavior directly onto a deeply wired routine you already do every single day without fail.
Just think about your own morning for a second. You can effortlessly chain habits together by using the completion of one highly reliable action as the biological trigger for the next one. So, minute 1, you pour your morning coffee. Minute 2, you meditate for just 60 seconds. Pouring the coffee is your rock-solid cue. Once you master that connection, you can create a whole chain. Minute 3, you write your daily to-do list. You are essentially hijacking your brain's existing highly efficient pathways to subtly smuggle in new behaviors.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the habit replacement strategy.
Simply trying to eliminate a bad habit by sheer force of will completely ignores your brain's entire reward-based learning system. When you just try to stop doing something, you basically create this massive behavioral vacuum. Your brain is still in the background screaming for its dopamine reward. But strategically finding a healthier substitute behavior perfectly satisfies that underlying trigger. In fact, studies published in the European Journal of Social Psychology found that people who actively replace a habit rather than just trying to stop one cold turkey are actually 25% more successful. So how do we actually pull this off? Well, first, you have to identify your specific cue and the exact reward you're really seeking. Is it stress relief? Are you just bored? Second, choose a substitute behavior that provides a very similar reward. Third, change up your environment to make the bad habit really hard to do and the good one super easy. A phenomenal real-world example of this is tennis legend Serena Williams. She realized she had this deeply ingrained habit of negative self-talk right after missing a shot. Now, she couldn't just magically stop being frustrated, so instead she replaced the reaction by substituting a physical routine. She started adjusting her racket strings, taking a deep breath, and touching her racket to the ground. That new behavior completely satisfied her brain's cue to reset, but totally stripped away the negativity.
Now, of course, the cravings for the old habit are still going to hit, and sometimes hit hard. When you're trying to break those old loops, try using the RAIN mindfulness technique developed by neuroscientist Dr. Judson Brewer. It stands for Recognize the craving starting, acknowledge it without any judgment, investigate the physical sensations happening in your body, and finally, note how those feelings change. This lets you ride out those intense cravings like they're just a temporary wave. By simply observing the craving, rather than blindly acting on it, you literally disrupt the automatic loop firing in your basal ganglia. And this brings us to a really foundational truth about behavior change from Dr. Fogg. Yes, we obviously need repetition to physically build up those neural pathways. But it is the immediate feeling of success, that rush of positive emotion, and that quick dopamine hit right as you complete the behavior that actually cements these new pathways in your brain. You have got to celebrate your tiny wins. That feeling of success is literally the glue holding the habit together.
So, we've broken down the actual neuroscience, we've debunked those stubborn timeline myths, and we've explored the Fogg behavior model, habit stacking, and the habit replacement strategy. Now that you truly understand the biological anatomy of your brain and the actual engineering behind behavioral design, what tiny, deeply impactful habit will you begin building today?